Hi, I'm Siobhán Fletcher and welcome to the latest edition of our Newscast. Under the provisions in the Assisted Dying Bill 2023, eligible adults over the age of 18 with a prognosis of 12 months or less to live, who've been resident on the island for at least 5 years, will be given the right to choose to die. Now, does this mean that we'll see assisted deaths taking place on the island imminently? In short, no. The bill now needs to be signed and sent for royal assent, whereafter it will then become law. The wider health and social care framework will then need to be put into place to facilitate the practice here, and there's a whole load of secondary legislation still in the pipeline to ensure safeguards. But for campaigners like Vicky Christian, who's the chair of the Isle of Man branch of My Death, My Decision, there's relief that the legislation has made it this far. Then, I suppose, first of all, can you introduce yourself for me?
Hi, I'm Vicky Christian. I'm the chair of the local group of My Death, My Decision.
Perfect. And so, obviously, you'll be well versed in the news from yesterday. I suppose, first of all, what was your sort of initial reaction to that?
Oh, very, very pleased. Very, very relieved. It's been a long haul, and to have got it past that post. It's not over yet, but for now, it's as good as it can be.
And so you've been quite vocal this whole time, but how long's the journey been for you then? How long have you been working on this?
It's been many years. I've always been a supporter of assisted dying, and I've known of people campaigning for many, many years before I started. But I got interested in 2018. In 2019, I had a meeting with Dr Allinson and Mrs Barber, who were the proposer and seconder of the legislation, and we had a good chat. And then I went away and I set up a local group for My Death, My Decision.
And so what I suppose made you interested in the first place? Was there anything in particular that piqued your interest about it?
I'm a humanist. I'm also a humanist celebrant. But humanists always run on people having autonomy over their own lives. So I was a supporter of the abortion legislation modernisation for the same reason. People should have a choice over what happens to their bodies. So as a humanist, I'm a funeral celebrant. And I very often go into houses where I know I don't discuss assisted dying, but I know from the way families are telling me about their loved ones that with the best palliative care that hospice can offer, there are always one or two who don't get full relief from their horrible symptoms at the end of their life. And I know how much this is needed on the Isle of Man.
And so I suppose like you say, there's still a long way to go in terms of, obviously, there'll be all this sort of secondary legislation. They've already said it'll be maybe a couple of years before this is even in place. They need to put all these systems in place. Do you think that then in that time sort of adequate safeguards can be put in place to make this work?
Absolutely. We're well on the way towards that, with doctors having to have training to be able to spot coercion. There's lots of safeguards already in place, but I'm sure that with the secondary legislation, I'm sure with the secondary legislation in place, there will be even tighter safeguards.
And so I suppose like your initial reaction there being kind of like obviously happy that this has passed, do you feel any relief or is the fact that there's still that way to go, do you feel like actually this battle's not over yet?
Well, I feel a great sense of relief because it's been very hard work, very demanding. Our group have been demonstrating outside Tynwald for almost every debate of this for the last several years. So we've been really busy and hardworking and writing letters to politicians and appearing on TV programmes and things. So we've been very, very busy. So yes, initially relief, but we still have to be very careful, and we will still be making sure that the politicians follow through on this in the next 2 years, possibly whilst they set up these regulations and codes of practice.
I suppose then, I mean, you've mentioned like all the work that's gone into this. So, you know, writing to politicians, giving evidence, like attending all the different debates and things. Do you feel like those opinions have been really heard then by?
Yes, I'm sure they have. Can I tell you about the difference between the one campaign and the other? The campaign that I've been running has been, we initially would have liked to have had unbearable suffering as well as a 6-month terminal diagnosis included in our bill. That was a step too far for Manx politicians to go. It's still being looked at in other jurisdictions, and it still works well in some of the countries that have got assisted dying already. But our politicians decided not. But as a result of our representations, we went for a 12-month terminal diagnosis, which means that people with horrible neurodegenerative diseases like motor neuron disease, for instance, have much more chance of accessing an assisted death now, because a doctor will be able to say, yes, your lifespan is likely to be less than a year now, whereas that would be a very difficult call for a doctor to make if it was 6 months.
I suppose, and you can look at this both ways. I think opponents of the bill talk about the sort of expansion out for various different illnesses. But then if you're a proponent of the bill, you might think, well, actually, I'd like this to include things like, like dementia and Alzheimer's and things, where if you've seen it in your family, you might think, oh, yes, I know what I want with that. Do you think that that's something that we could see down the line, but with those safeguards in place?
I think there is a big difficulty with things like dementia, because we have put it in, or we're going to put it in our legislation, that people have to be capable, and it becomes the Mental Capacity Act fits in with that. So you've got to be not only mentally capable when you make the decision to have an assisted death, but you've got to be mentally capable on the day that it takes place. Now, for dementia, that probably isn't going to work. And so that's something I don't think that will be got round in a hurry. I think that other cases are more likely, but the whole thing about the legislation that we've got is that we trust our politicians to make the right decisions. No extra things will be added to the Assisted Dying Act other than those discussed, debated at length by our trusted politicians in Tynwald, and we have to trust that. So when somebody says, oh, mission creep, we'll be having all sorts of people will be saying, I've got a bad cold or whatever, there won't be that mission creep until it's been discussed and debated by the politicians that we trust to make these decisions for us.
So then I suppose at the core, you're happy with the sort of safeguards that will happen and that will be in place when this is eventually implemented then?
Yes, very happy, yes. Yeah.
And I think it's interesting that you mentioned that you're in that sort of coalition across the UK and that they're all, because obviously it's at different stages around the UK, around the world. Discussions in that group, does that include things like looking at the places where it is already in place? So we it's been well documented that Canada has a version of it.
Yes,
obviously people know about like Switzerland and those sorts of
countries. There are about 30 countries now.
Yeah.
And there's been very little amended in the legislation of any of those countries. It's working really well in all these other countries. Very sadly, people from the Isle of Man are accessing assisted dying in Switzerland at the moment. I mean, the argument against that is that, A, you have to be fairly wealthy to get yourself to Switzerland, but also you've got to be fit to get to Switzerland. But it works well in Switzerland, in the Netherlands, all over the world. Australia, lots of different provinces in Australia now, Canada, are accessing it really successfully.
And you mentioned your role as a humanist celebrant as well. Have you had anyone reach out to you since the news yesterday, at all?
Not specifically that I know. I've had lots of messages of congratulations or, people saying that this has gone really well. But it's been a huge privilege to work with such a team. The team from London have been very supportive. We brought 2 people over from London at various occasions to brief politicians and speak to local supporters. But I've had 400 people on a Facebook group and about 12 really close people that have worked with me over this. So it's been real teamwork.
Yeah, I mean, well done. And as you've got to this stage. I suppose, is there anything else you want to add at all? Anything else you want to cover that you feel like we haven't?
No, I'd just like to reassure everybody that in spite of the opposition, which we know exists, this is purely a matter of choice for the person who is terminally ill. It's not going to be forced on anybody at all. It is just a choice of where to die and at what time to die. And I think that's really important to acknowledge.
Vicky mentioned there that people with illnesses like motor neuron disease would now be given hope that they could access an assisted death. That would have made a difference for someone like Sue Biggerstaff's husband Simon, who died on the 29th of May 2022 and could barely communicate in his last few weeks. She told me she was overwhelmed in the Legislative Council chamber this week as she watched members vote in favour of the bill.
My name's Sue Biggerstaff and I live in Ballabeg.
Perfect. It goes without saying, it's obviously we've had this big news this week that, you know, the assisted dying bill kind of passed that last sort of hurdle, I suppose, with the Legislative Council, and now it's going to be signed and get royal assent down the line later this year maybe. I guess, first of all, what was your reaction to that news?
I was very, very overwhelmed, and I burst into tears the minute they said yes. It's been a long haul. I've relived Simon's dying many times at many interviews, and to finally see it go through, and the hope that, okay, it's not going to happen tomorrow, there's lots of things to sort, but the fact is that now at some point in the future no one will have to suffer as Simon did, and that was just, well, it was joy, albeit for possibly the wrong reasons, but I was very happy.
Yeah, you've been like such a vocal proponent of this whole time, and I know I don't want to sort of make you relive the whole thing again, because you've had to do it in a million interviews, but I suppose the message I always get from you when I hear you speak is that you're very much trying to give Simon that voice, so do you think he would be happy with this development as well?
Yes, and fortunately his daughter, his sister, his family have all been behind me, which is lovely. Everybody I know actually has been wonderfully supportive, but yes, I would like to think Simon would be proud, because in the end he was asking for it to stop and there was nothing to make it stop, you know, so he had decided he was going to starve himself, but it was too late for that to work. That takes a month, and I can't believe anybody would really want people to go that way, but lots do, and lots do other awful methods of suicide way before they need to. This should literally be for people terminally ill at the end of their life, when the pain has become intolerable, within weeks to me. And you know when that time is. People say, you know, the minute I get the diagnosis I'll go, well, Simon didn't. Simon wanted to carry on. He wanted to do as much as possible. We'd bought a house in Spain and we went out to it, and sadly we had to cut it short because he deteriorated so rapidly. But the fact is, people want to live. Only when it becomes unbearable do they want to go, and at that point they should be allowed to go, not to suffer as he did for days or even weeks on end in intolerable pain with no choice, because you're paralysed from the neck down and reliant on somebody else.
Some of the opponents of this legislation, and I know you wouldn't wish that on anyone, but do you think that because they've not had that experience they maybe don't realise that sort of reality?
Right, so I'm down to my personal opinion now, and my personal opinion is, if you haven't witnessed this, you have no idea what it's like. And when you're with somebody 24/7 and you see them suffering and hear them crying in pain, you can give me your opinion. And I've had people come up to me in the street, not just here but across, purely because I've been on the telly and I have blue hair, I think, stand out. I've had people come up and tell me their stories, and there's so many out there, heartbreaking stories of this suffering. And yes, I think people who haven't witnessed it, they don't know, and they're protected from it. And I'm not saying palliative care fails, because it doesn't, but Simon ended up with a driver in each limb delivering pain relief, as well as pain relief through his peg and patches, and it didn't matter what they give him, because MND is supposed to be a pain-free illness, but he had other complications, and as I have said before, his skin was starting to decompose, and their nerve endings, you just can't imagine the intolerable pain he was in, and it's nobody should have to suffer. And this is about freedom of choice. Lots of people have come to me from the religious aspect. I know Tim Glover is very much in that, and my argument is, if it's against your beliefs, don't do it, but don't take that choice away from anyone else. And the same of anything, it's about choice. And if I'd like to think if I was in as much pain as Simon was, I would have that choice. And this brought it very much real for me. I actually had the discussion with my children that if this bill didn't pass and I got something similar, be warned, kids, I'll kill myself before I get there, because I can't face going through what I saw Simon go through.
I suppose we've got this point now in terms of this will become law eventually, and come into action in coming years, I suppose. Yeah. Are you hoping for a specific timeline, or is it just for you who've campaigned for this for so long, it's just that fact that it will become law in the coming years? You know what I mean?
The fact that it will become law is a great relief. obviously I do understand there are lots of things to sort out, codes of practice, training, etc. But for me, the sooner the better, because the longer people have to wait, the more people are going to die like Simon did, in pain. And it's just not fair. And I've said it before, and people say you can't compare an animal to a person, but I've said if I had a dog that was incontinent, lying on the floor, paralysed from the neck down, lying in it, completely incontinent in every aspect, just lying in its own filth and waiting for you to clean it up, I'd actually be prosecuted, because that's against the law, because it's cruel. So how can anybody say it's okay for a human being to live through that? How can you? It's just no way.
Now, it's not just the Isle of Man's legislation that's been in the headlines this week. Over in the UK, a proposed 4-year delay to their bill has seen campaigners for terminally ill people there up in arms. MPs are debating various amendments in a committee scrutinising the proposed law line by line. Labour's Kim Leadbeater, who's behind the plans there, says she's reluctantly pushing back its introduction because it's important to do it properly. But some supporters there say they need dignity, not delays. During Prime Minister's questions, Sir Keir Starmer said Parliament will continue to work on that bill.
It is an important issue on which there are different views across the House and within parties. And if Parliament chooses to pass this bill, the government will implement it in a way that is safe and practicable.
I asked Vicky Christian if she foresees delays across the water having an impact here. And I don't know if you've been watching kind of developments in the UK. Even today they've talked about maybe this being held back in the UK for, I believe, 4 years. So there's sort of delays there. What do you feel about, because oftentimes I think the perception at least is that we often follow the UK in terms of legislation. Big deal was made yesterday out of the fact that the Isle of Man's the first place in the British Isles to sort of approve this. Do you think we actually might lead the way here, or do you think we're going to end up waiting for them a bit? I'm
part of something called the Assisted Dying Coalition, which has representatives from England, Scotland, Wales, Ireland North, Ireland South, Channel Islands, and me from the Isle of Man. And I know we are leading the way, and the other jurisdictions are extremely jealous of the position that we're in now.
So are you feeling encouraged then that we are that leader in this?
Oh, absolutely we are. Yes, absolutely.
Thank you for making it to the end of the Manx Radio Newscast. You are obviously someone with exquisite taste. May I politely suggest you might want to subscribe to this and a wide range of Manx Radio podcasts at your favourite podcast provider, so our best bits will magically appear on your smartphone. Thank you.